Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our Caregiving Series Part 1, Understanding Identity Changes. My name is Alana Dillon. I'm an Education and Support Services Coordinator with Parkinson Society, British Columbia, and I will be facilitating our webinar today. Before you will see an agenda. We have two speakers with us today, and I'd like to introduce them now. First up, we have Kaitlyn Roland, who will be speaking on role changes in caregiving. And Kaitlyn Roland completed her PhD research at the University of British Columbia in 2012, which measured Parkinson's disease-related changes to daily muscle activity and consequences for physical function. She is currently a research scientist at the Office of the Seniors Advocate and the Institute of Aging and Lifelong Health. Her work has examined care needs and well-being in PD, dementia, and their caregivers. Kaitlyn is a certified yoga teacher and offers yoga classes to persons with Parkinson's disease called Yoga Dopa. Overall, she aims to support independent living and reduce distress and healthcare utilization in persons with Parkinson's disease, dementia, and their caregivers. And following Kaitlyn, we have Jolyon Hallows, who will be speaking on advice for the new caregiver. Jolyon Hallows is an instructor, writer, author, speaker, and advocate for caregivers of Parkinson's disease. He resides in Burnaby, BC, and manages the blog A Parkinson's Life and a Caregiver's Roadmap. He also volunteers with Parkinson Society, British Columbia, as part of the Speakers Bureau, providing talks pertaining to caregiving and Parkinson's disease in public and semi-public settings. So Kaitlyn and Jolyon, I welcome you both. Thank you both for being here today. And I will pass it over to Kaitlyn now so that she can share her screen and start her presentation. One sec.
I want to just share a little bit about myself. For those of you who haven't met me over the years, I have been at the University of Victoria since 2012, and I have been doing work with people with Parkinson's disease and their loved ones and families. For many years, my grandfather had Parkinson's disease, and his wife ended up being his caregiver. And so, can you see my mouse? So that is my grandfather, and that is his wife, my grandmother, and they had 10 children. And watching their journey with Parkinson's disease, seeing the amount of support they had from the large family that we have, and really realizing that it takes a village to support people with Parkinson's disease. And started doing a lot of work with care and care partners, and then transitioned to looking at how people with Parkinson's move throughout their day and what type of supports they need throughout their day. Did a bit of work with yoga and using that as a support strategy for people with Parkinson's and their caregivers. And then currently I'm working at the Office of the Seniors Advocate and looking at kind of advocacy in a broader role around older adults in general. I'm also a mom. I have 2 young kids. I have a son, Ozzy, who's 5, and a daughter, Imogen. She's about 15 months now. So it's been quite an interesting year with 2 little ones. So today, we're just gonna take some time to kind of talk about your role, who you are as care partners, and kind of how you show up in that role. And so I just want to thank you for being here today and for taking the time to really show up, because I love this quote by Rosalind Carter: is there are only 4 kinds of people in this world: those who have been caregivers, those who are currently are caregivers, those who will be caregivers, and those who will need caregiving. And so in the sense that we are all caregivers in some aspects of our lives, and we are all care recipients in other aspects of our lives. And so a lot of pieces of this work really relate to all of us and how we show up in our various roles. Before we get too far into this webinar, if you want to, make sure you have maybe a paper and some paper and pen beside you. There might be some opportunities to kind of jot down notes or things that might resonate for you. For me, as I hear webinars and presentations. For me, sometimes things land a little bit better or a little bit more close to home when I'm able to write things down or apply things in the context that I'm in. And so I'll give you a few opportunities throughout the next 20 minutes or so to jot down a few things that may help some of this material land for you and resonate with you. So if you want to take a minute to see if you have pen and paper nearby, or able to take a note on your notepad on your computer, or however your setup is, then that is an option, and I'm just putting that in. So ultimately the direction for this webinar today is really around caring for self, and this role of caregiving can last many years, many months. And so this idea that it needs to be sustainable, and that idea that you need to put on your own oxygen mask on the airplane before you put on the oxygen mask of the person beside you. And this idea about making self-care a habit, or making some of these pieces a practice. It's not something that you can just do and check and say, okay, I'm done. I've looked at what is meaningful for me as a caregiver, or I've wrote a list of the self-care practices that I hope to engage in. And really this is a practice and a habit, just like brushing our teeth, every day, multiple times a day, thinking about, how can I support myself and care for self so that I can, best care for others. And I want to just touch a little bit on this idea of caregiver and this word caregiver, because I think it can be quite a weighted or loaded word. And really, what does it actually mean to be a caregiver? And this word means different things to different people. As a parent, it means a different thing. As a spouse, it means a different thing. As a child, it means a different thing. As a friend, as a neighbor, as a family member. And so, thinking about what does that word caregiver really mean for you? And I encourage you to think about that and jot that down, because that might be a good starting place to thinking about, today we're going to talk about what that word means and how we can draw meaning from that experience and identify with that experience. So, to you, what does that word caregiver really mean? How does that resonate with your experience? So, the ultimate goal of all of this is to support you and your health and well-being so that you can be the best self that you are. You can care for others, you can care for self. And so when we think about health and well-being, it's really this balance between positive and negative aspects. And so, these negative aspects of health, things like burden and stress, predict negative health and strain. Whereas positive aspects of health really provide a buffer for those negative aspects. So, this idea of being prepared, how prepared you feel to assume a caregiving role, is a really important positive variable. How you accept that role and almost step up to the plate. And, showing up today and being here shows that you're dedicated to being prepared. Having a good relationship quality with the person that you're caring for really is found to significantly lower levels of depression, encourage physical health, better relationship quality, open and honest communication. And that idea of kind of acceptance and joy, bringing back those pieces. And what we're really going to focus on today is this idea of a meaningful experience. And so the ability to draw meaning from the care experience is directly related to physical and mental health and well-being. Whether you learn something new about yourself through the caregiving role, or finding strengths in your ability to provide care or comfort for the person you're caring for. So these are the things, rather than focusing on the burden and the stress, we really want to reframe it to focus on how can we foster resilience and preparedness and meaning in these aspects of your life. And it takes a village. It takes a village to support someone with Parkinson's disease, and it also takes a village to support you as a caregiver. And so starting to think about what some of these pieces of support that you have in place in your life already, and also thinking about where are some of the gaps in that support. Family support, respite care, training programs really do make a positive difference for many caregivers of persons with Parkinson's disease. But it's kind of unclear, despite all these supports out there, not everyone is able to access them, and not everyone does access them. But there's also these different circumstances where some caregivers for people with Parkinson's disease manage their circumstances very well, while others who have similar situations maybe do not. And so one of the explanations for this difference in coping is how people cope with stressors differently or more successfully than others. So we often hear this word coping, and what does it actually mean? And coping is really personal management of a stressful situation that changes the meaning of that stressor and also reduces the threat of that stressor. So caregivers, for example, research shows that caregivers who have successful coping strategies have less burden and have better health. And so when we think about that balance of health, the scale is really tipped towards some of those positive aspects and less against the burden and the depression and the stressful aspects. And so, what are some coping strategies, and how can we realistically implement some of those coping strategies? Before we start to understand and unravel some of that piece, I think we need to take a step back and understand what is stressors, what is causing some of those stressors in the caregiving role that we need to engage those coping strategies to help manage. And so this diagram here is something called a stress process model. And so it really says that this idea that stress is a process. It means it changes over time. It changes depending on certain contextual factors. And these pieces play together to have a big impact on caregiver outcomes. So things like life satisfaction, depression, burden, mental and physical health. And this really speaks to the Parkinson experience as well, because as you know, when you've met one person with Parkinson's disease, you've met one person with Parkinson's disease. And that disease manifests differently depending on the time of day, the context, the environmental factors, and that also changes over time. And so as a result of that, the caregiving experiences fluctuate depending on the course of the day, the context, the environment, and that also changes over time. And so coping strategies or personal management strategies or self-care strategies that have been successful last month, yesterday, and even this morning may not work this afternoon or tomorrow or 2 months from now. And so really understanding how we can draw strengths from within so we can start to effectively manage some of these pieces. So when we think about stressors, primary stressors for caregiving and the caregiving role are really related to the care demands associated with meeting the needs of a person with Parkinson's disease. But then there's also these secondary stressors that exist, and they're really produced by this primary stressors. And they're things like changes in role, economic factors, family conflict, relationship, these intrapsychic and role strains. And these primary care needs stressors and these role strain stressors are really influenced by the background, the contextual factors, things like socioeconomic variables, the duration of caregiving that you've been engaged in, the general environment that you live in. And so the coping strategies and the social supports that you use really depend on all of these variables. It's a very dynamic model. And this is just to help understand that, we need a a toolbox. We need to be armed with a toolbox, and not only, you know, having one tool to help us manage, but we need multiple tools depending on the context that we're in, the place that our care recipient is in, and all of those changing dynamic pieces. So this idea that coping strategies and social supports really mediate the stress according to this stress process model. And so we saw in this stress process model that an outcome of caregiving can be burden. And when we think about this term burden, it's really a concept that used to describe kind of the overall appraisal of a caregiving experience. And so the burden of caregiving can really include, you know, many aspects of the entire situation: care recipient behaviors, role conflict, different stressors, and the toll on caregivers' health, you know, is really attributed to this daily burden. So, for example, caregivers have reported, you know, less participation in healthy behaviors. There's reports of more, you know, physical conditions and poor self-rated health. So in other words, there's evidence that really shows that we really need to support self-care and caregivers. And this is what we're really hoping to do today, to give you a few of these tools. And so we also know that, you know, some caregivers manage really well with burden, while others do not. And so starting to understand what type of tools those caregivers possess and what can we learn from that. So things like caregiver stress, depression, well-being, physical health, and self-efficacy, they really only account for a small amount of the variance between caregivers who have positive experiences and those who have negative experiences. So, you know, a good diet, exercise, good sleep, you know, good mental health strategies really aren't the whole picture. And so, you know, as someone who practices yoga, you know, I do believe in the power of moving your body. And, you know, as a parent, I believe in the power of a good night's sleep. And so these are all tools in your toolbox. But, you know, research is really showing us that there is more that can really help, you know, tip this balance between negative and positive experiences. And this is really what I want to focus on today. Because this idea of self-identity and finding meaning in the caregiving role is really a big reason for this difference in negative and positive experience. And so we know from psychology that when someone finds meaning in a role, it's related to improved well-being. And so for caregiving, we know that research focuses on the negative aspects. And we hear burden a lot in the literature, which is not to be discounted. Burden can be considerable, especially when, you know, a caregiver has little or no experience, or they have a significant full-time care role with special needs. But, you know, many caregivers also, you know, provide a sense of meaningfulness, and they derive a sense of well-being that they are performing a vital and caring role for our loved ones. And we know that that ability to find meaning has a positive impact on well-being. And we're going to focus on that for the, you know, next 10 minutes of this presentation. And so this, you know, some of these pieces really come from Dr. Viktor Frankl and his seminal work on man's search for meaning. And this book is really a meditation on what the experience of Auschwitz and how that experience taught him about the primary purpose of life, quest for meaning, and what really sustained him all those years. And so for Dr. Frankl, meaning really came from three possible sources: purposeful work, love, and courage in the face of difficulty. And so after World War II, Dr. Viktor Frankl, who was a survivor of the Nazi concentration camp, wrote this book, Man's Search for Meaning. And, you know, the Nazis had taken his family, his home, and his business. And after about 2 years into his experience, he noticed the difference between the people who survived and the people who died. And it wasn't their age or their general health or their physical strength, it was their attitude. And this, you know, really serves to underline a lot of this work on meaning and the psychology of meaning as relates to health and well-being. And so we cannot choose how Parkinson's disease progresses. We cannot choose how other people will behave or feel, and we can't choose how long it's going to last, how bad it's going to get or how much it's going to cost. But really the power that we have is our attitude towards the everyday, every event and every moment. And that attitude that you choose has an impact on you and how you engage with the world. So this idea of attributing meaning to an experience, what does that actually mean? And meaning, it can be described as a transformative process, and it allows people to turn into a negative situation to a beneficial or meaningful situation. And it's really this concept of finding meaning, for people with who care for people with Parkinson's disease, is really based on this idea of a larger perspective of understanding and relating to this situation. So when we think about Dr. Frankl's work, it really suggests that there are three aspects of meaning, and that these aspects of meaning all simultaneously exist. So the experience of suffering and loss and powerlessness, and through that experience, people may make intentional choices on how to respond to life's events. And through that, they have the potential of moving forward towards, provisional or ultimate meaning. So those three aspects of meaning, this idea of loss and powerlessness, really broadly relates to the difficulties, the personal interpretations of those difficulties, the feelings that you experience, the loss that you experience, the loss for the plans of the future, the inability to change your situation. And understanding that sense of grief really helps you move forward in finding day-to-day meaning, that provisional meaning, and also connecting to broader philosophical and spiritual meanings. So, thinking about this idea of loss and powerlessness, and theoretically, these items are supported in the literature around this idea that suffering and powerlessness and feeling loss is really a part of finding meaning. And we can't deny those feelings, but we have to make personal choices on how to interpret those experiences. And although we predominantly focus on stress and burden related to caregiving, grief is a really important paradigm. Given that as caregivers, you may experience many losses over the course of the day, over the course of the years, based on where you are in your experience. And so grief is kind of a way in which stress associated with caregiving can show up. So things like I statements around I miss, or I wish I could run away from, those type of things are really important to consider and acknowledge, because understanding where those senses of loss and grief are allow you to acknowledge them and then use those to drive meaning. Focusing on how a person finds day-to-day meaning through caregiving is important. Thinking about the personal choices that you make, and those kind of short-term experiences. So we can find provisional meaning in day-to-day tasks and relationships. Our personal values are really critical to finding meaning, and people can create meaning by making choices, and there's something that we can have control over. And so this really aligns with the idea that positive aspects of caregiving can simultaneously exist with those negative aspects. So we can hold space, and we need to hold space for those pieces that we grieve, those pieces of loss, but also those things that we are grateful for, those strengths that we have found through our caregiving role, and the things that we have learned about ourselves in those process. So thinking about, things that you enjoy, blessings that you have during the day, senses of purpose and meaning, the memories that you have and shared, the strengths that you have found, the sense of relationship and affection that you have fostered, the sense of purposefulness and care. Thinking about and being hopeful for the future, learning about new things about yourself, understanding your role in the current situation, finding strength and being able to tap into those new strengths, acknowledging that things may get better. And then the third piece of this work on meaning really is this deeper philosophical meaning of life. And so this idea of, what do you believe in? What is your moral compass? Is it prayer? Is it service to the earth? Is it, some sort of higher power? Is it a sense of self? And being able to derive strength from that. That idea that suffering ceases to be suffering at the moment it finds a meaning, such as the meaning of a sacrifice. And so in some of the work done with caregiving around caregivers around meaning, when interviewing caregivers on the meaning they derive in their role, we really find that there's meaning in being able to care for a loved one, the ongoing commitment to the relationship, whether that's marriage vows or commitment to family. And thinking about this idea that, choosing caregiving and this role as a choice. And so in some ways it may be an obligation, but in other ways it can be a choice, and reframing that as a choice, deciding to be, whatever role is his husband, wife, son, daughter, neighbor, friend, whatever, and choosing to be a caregiver in that role. Taking these small initial steps towards adopting a positive attitude, accepting the situation, and using that acceptance as a shift from, grieving maybe the loss of what could have been, and moving towards finding meaning in the new reality and the new situation. Realizing that you have a choice in how you react, and we'll talk quite a bit about resilience and some more grounded strategies next time when we chat. We'll kind of put a lot of this into practice, but thinking about this idea of we have a choice in how we react, and we can choose to dwell on some of the negative pieces, and sometimes that feels really good, and then other times choosing to focus on some of the positive pieces, considering how your attitude can affect your health. Focusing on the blessings. So interviews with caregivers, we really saw that when caregivers find meaning in the caregiving role, they can see beyond the losses, they can focus on the blessings and the humor, and really take joy in the moment. And then thinking about this idea of building your own village. And so what are some of the resources and supports that you need as a caregiver to support you? And so I bet you're very good at finding all of these pieces of supports for the person that you're caring for. And so, we're gonna deep dive into this a little bit more next time as well, but thinking about, what are the resources that you need to support you? Support groups, books, respite, family, friends, kind of considering how do you create the village for yourself as well. So, I want to take the next 2 minutes just to talk about, the context of this idea of finding meaning in the caregiver role really changes, because you might be saying, sure, I can do this today, but what about next week, next month, next year? And we know that caregivers have multiple and evolving roles, and the impact to your health and well-being shifts over time. And so that idea that caregiver tasks are dynamic in nature really can be looked at as an opportunity for finding new meanings and new strengths over time. So when we think about how people move through their experience as caregivers, we really have to recognize that this is a process, and how people move through this process really differs. We kind of begin with this emerging awareness that there's a problem, and over time this evolves to this idea of there's increasing care needs we need to meet. There's increasing assistance with household tasks, self-care tasks. Maybe it turns into placement or enrollment in other supportive programs. And so this idea of that the tasks are changing, but they're also accumulating over time. And each phase of this trajectory really brings in new challenges for caregivers. And so within those new challenges, I really want you to encourage you to think about them as opportunities to find new meaning in the new role and how it's changed. because we know the way that you spend your time in your caregiving role specifically, the activities that you do and the time that you have committed to those roles really change. And so from assistance with daily activities to direct care to complex care to, you know, general support. And so how you manage your tasks really depend on your values and your preference and your knowledge, your skills. And this is really how you find meaning in this role that supports you. So this idea of that you are constantly refining this new normal, you're constantly refining this meaning and what this role may mean to you. And while transitions are, you know, often thought of as stressful, they're opportunities for growth, and they're opportunities for, you know, stopping and thinking about those three aspects around, you know, I'm transitioning to a new phase in my caregiving experience. It is an opportunity to pause and reflect, potentially grieve and deal with those losses that have occurred, and then thinking about how to find new meaning in the day-to-day. What has changed? Where are the opportunities to move forward? And tie that in with that higher sense of meaning that you derive around engaging with the work. So I do have a couple reflection pieces that we can maybe talk about a little bit later after the breakout sessions and questions. But thank you for spending your time with us today and really taking that time to think about how we can help to support you and how you can start to engage in that sense of meaning and reflection for themselves. And so I'm going to pass it on to Jolyon.
Good. First of all, a little bit about my own story. In 1996, 25 years ago, my wife Sandra, there we are. My wife Sandra was diagnosed with Parkinson's disease, and I became her caregiver. I had no idea what that meant. I didn't even know such a thing as a caregiver existed. It was something that was completely alien to me. But when she passed away about 4 years ago, and I wrote a book about, it's part memoir, and it's part description of Parkinson's, and it's a good deal about caregiving, Parkinson's life and a caregiver's roadmap, and it summarizes what I learned over these years. Now, as I said, when my reaction to caregiving was, now what? I didn't know I was a caregiver. What do I do? How do I handle all of this stuff? In a sense, Parkinson's is, I hate to say advantageous, but it's generally a slow-moving condition. It evolves over time. So I had time to adapt. I shudder to think of people who are thrust into a full caregiving role in an instant as a result of a medical emergency or an accident. But with me, I was able to evolve from just helping my wife stand up from a chair or holding her hand when we walked to give her some support, all the way to, at the end of it, providing total care for her. And I was able to learn over the years how to do that. And when I wrote my book, when you write something, it forces you to get clear on categorizing things. And I break down caregiving into 3 different dimensions: the physical, the structural, and the emotional. Let me talk about each of these in turn. The physical. This is the how-to stuff. How do I give a bed bath? How do I transfer someone without risking my back, or dress someone who can't stand? One of the things when I first realized I was a caregiver was that I went online to look for information. And what I found was a morass of emotional turmoil. And I understand that. I mean, I was in that morass myself. but it didn't help me in the day-to-day activities. How do I actually do this? That's what I wanted to learn. And it took some time to do that, and I'll be coming to the learning part in a few minutes. The structural, how do I create an environment in which my house is safer and more convenient? For example, reinforce the towel racks in your bathroom. I learned that the hard way when I came home. I heard a crash, and my wife was on the floor in the bathroom with the remnants of the towel rack around her. She'd grabbed onto it for support, and I couldn't hold her weight. So, okay, I realized I have to firm up the towel racks, make them more secure. One of the things that we set up an alarm system in the house. My office is in the basement, and I couldn't hear her if she was calling out. So I bought a wireless doorbell, and I put buttons all over the house, in the bathroom and the bedroom and various places where she could get to them. So she could ring the doorbell if she needed help, and I would hear it. So this was a way of making sure that she was never out of reach. One of the other things I did was, it occurred to me, I would go out for an errand, do some shopping or something. What would happen if I had an accident or a medical emergency and couldn't communicate? No one would know about my wife. So I wanted to make up a wallet card so that if I was in an emergency, someone would know to contact someone. But contact who? Who should go on that card? I have family members, but they don't live in Vancouver. My doctor or the case manager, they're 9 to 5, 5 days a week. So I was able to get a hold of a nursing agency that had a 24-hour dispatch and made arrangements with them that if anything happened to me, whoever discovered me could look through my wallet, find this card, and call them to go and look after my wife. And it relieved that burden from me. It made it easier for me to go out and do the shopping. The next aspect is the emotional. And here's the question: how do I deal with the emotional turmoil? Kaitlyn talked a lot about that, about the upheavals and the guilt and the frustration and the depression. How do I deal with that? How do I look after myself? And I'll be talking more about that in the next session next week when I've got a session on harnessing negative emotions. But for now, it was something that I really had to get a grip on. So when I put all these three components together, the physical, the structural, and the emotional, I began to put together some advice for new caregivers. And I've given presentations on this. There was a caregiving conference in Chicago a couple of times that I gave presentations there on what I think the advice that I would give to people who are new caregivers, or indeed people who are caregivers already. And they fall into 5 categories: learn, find support, reach agreement with your caree, look after yourself, and get help. So let me talk about each of these: learn, support, agreement, self-care, and help. Let's begin with learn. You need to learn. About what? Well, there's 3 areas you need to look at. One is, how do you give care? This is the physical stuff that I talked about earlier. How do you dress someone who can't stand? Well, okay, I've got to learn this, but how? Where do I learn it from? Well, from people who know how to do it. Care aides. So I would hire a care aide, or a care aide would come in from the Burnaby Home Care, and I would watch, and I'd have them teach me. For example, I was having trouble getting my wife dressed because I couldn't get her arm through the sleeve of the sweatshirt. And, you know, I risked breaking her arm, which was not the point. So how do I dress her properly? Then I watched the care aide. They just reached in the sleeve from the other end and grabbed her wrist and pulled it through. Easy. So people who do this as a profession know how to do it. So learn from them, watch them, have them supervise you while you practice. So you become an authority at giving care. You need to learn about the disease, about Parkinson's. Why? Well, because particularly I found when my wife was in hospital, I knew more about Parkinson's than the hospital staff did. Now, this is not to denigrate the hospital staff. There are thousands of conditions that send people to hospital, and nobody can be expert in all of them. But somebody needed to have some knowledge about Parkinson's. For example, you have to give the meds on time, unlike various other conditions where there's some flexibility. So you need to learn about the disease. How? Well, here's what I did and what I recommend. Take a couple of hours, go to the library, pull out all the books you can find on Parkinson's. Don't check them out. Take them to a table in the library and just leaf through them. Just look at the table of contents. Is this a textbook? Set it aside. Is this a technical book? Set it aside. Flip open and read a couple of pages. Are your eyes drooping? Set it aside. Does it cover the disease? Does it cover caregiving? Is it written in a manner that's accessible? You will end up with 2 or 3 books that fit your requirements. Take the books, check them out. Leave the other ones on the table. You don't have to put them back on the shelf. The librarians will do that. Check these books out or buy them and read them. That will teach you more about the disease than most people will ever learn. And the third thing you need to learn about is the services that are available. I've spoken to many people who are caregivers for people with Parkinson's, and one of my first questions is, do you have a case manager? And many people stare at me blankly. What's that? Well, in Burnaby, I live in Burnaby. We have an area called Burnaby Home Care, and my doctor referred my wife to that. So through that organization, she had a case manager. The case manager came out and did an assessment of her, referred us to an occupational therapist who came out and did a review of the house, a physiotherapist who taught me various aspects of motion and how to help my wife without hurting me. And the case manager is also the portal to all of the services that the health system offers. Things like care aides to come to your house to offer short-term support, day programs where you can put your spouse for a day, respite care where you can put your caree into a care home for several days. There's a program called CECIL, stands for Choices for Supports in Independent Living, CSIL. Getting qualified for this program involves going through some hoops, but once you do, you are authorized to hire your own care aide, and the health region will reimburse you the costs of that. So you can hire your own care aide. These are all great services, but there are other services as well. Transit. Caregivers are allowed to travel free with their carees on public transit. Even the airlines, Air Canada and WestJet, if you're flying within the country domestically, the caregivers travel free. You still have to pay the airport fees and taxes and so on, but not the airfare itself. So learn about these services. The more you find out what's out there to help you, the better off you're going to be, and the easier your caregiving journey is going to be. Find support. You're going to need someone to talk to. There's times when you just have to sit down and talk to someone and get support. Where do you find that support? Well, many caregivers find them in friends and family. And these are great sources of support if there is someone there that you can be candid with and who won't judge you and who will sit and listen and offer support. I have a question mark beside this because I chose not to use my friends and family for support. I'm not recommending this for you, but that you do this. I'm just pointing out what my decision was. Because I didn't want them to become surrogate caregivers for me. I wanted them to be friends and family. So where'd that leave me? Well, there's counselors. Unfortunately, counselors and therapists tend to be expensive, but they are excellent sources of support if you find the right one. Spiritual advisors. Some people can turn to a pastor or a priest as a spiritual advisor. My advice here is to be a little careful, because some spiritual advisors are more concerned with your soul than your body. And there are sometimes you might be thinking things that the spiritual advisor will say, well, no, you really shouldn't be thinking that. That's not the right thing. And you don't need someone laying a guilt trip on you. What I found ideal was a support group. And I got in contact with through the Parkinson Society, and I joined a support group. Now, I don't see myself as a support group kind of person, or I didn't, because I thought of them as huggy, feely weep fests, and I'm not a huggy, feely weep fest kind of person. But I needed someone to talk to, and what I found out when I went there was that they're not huggy, feely weep fests. They're they're support. People can talk about what's going on in their lives, and others will support them. And I'll give you an example. After a particularly rough day for both my wife and myself, it occurred to me that it'd be better off if she were gone. Now, this is a terrible thing to think about someone you love. And I could never reveal that to my friends and family. But when I said it in the support group, everybody else nodded. Yep, been there, done that. And I realized that I wasn't anomalous. I wasn't some sort of freak. This was a commonplace reaction. So my advice is to find a support group. Reach agreement with your caree. And here's how the agreement goes. I will do whatever I can to look after you and take care for you. In return, I want your appreciation and your thanks. Without this, you can begin to feel like a slave or an indentured servant, and it can build up resentment. There were times when I would do something for my wife and she'd ignore me, and it was an uncomfortable feeling. On the occasions when she did thank me or say, I love you, that meant the world to me. It was much more important. So come to that agreement. And if you have trouble talking about it, recruit someone to help, a close friend, a counselor, a spiritual advisor, someone who can make it clear that one of the things you need is the appreciation and thanks of your caree. The next one is care for yourself. And Kaitlyn in her presentation was very strong on this, and it's constant advice. Take care for yourself. Look after yourself. But why? When we caregivers are told, look after yourself, because if something, if you need your health and you need to be together in order to look after your caree. During my caregiving, I had some sort of medical problem, and I went to see a doctor, and I was talking to some friends about this, and the reaction from this friend was, well, you can't get sick. Who's going to look after your wife? And my response was, gee, thanks. You need to care for yourself, because we all need to care for ourselves. It's a personal obligation. We need to look after ourselves. Yes, looking after yourself will make you a better caregiver, but looking after yourself will make you a better person. So how do you do that? Well, find your passion. What do you want to do? What turns you on? What excites you? What is your passion? Do you like tinkering with motorcycles? Do you like writing? Do you like painting? Do you like dancing? What is it that you enjoy? What is it that really excites you? find that? To which the answer I normally get is, well, yeah, but how do I find time to do it? Well, there are some options. Home care. With in BC, the various health regions, similar to Burnaby Home Care, offers care aides who can come around and come to your home in the evening when you're out taking that course in Lebanese cooking or square dancing. There are day programs. I would take my wife to a day program and I'd drop her off at 10 in the morning and pick her up at 3 in the afternoon. And I could go out for a round of golf or meet some friends for lunch. Respite. This is where your caree gets placed into a care home, residential care home for a few days. Well, you can go off to that writers' conference or that hang gliding jamboree. You can find, this goes back to the finding the services that I talked about. You can find the services that will give you the time to follow the things that you want to do. And finally, seek help. If there is a piece of advice that routinely gets ignored by caregivers, it's this one: seek help. People tend not to do it. And there's two reasons. Men tend not to seek help because real men don't need no help. We can handle it ourselves. We're taught to be self-reliant and self-sufficient. If we have to ask for help, that's a sign of weakness, and I'm not going to do that. I'm going to do it myself. Well, I admit to a certain vulnerability to this attitude myself. I needed to look after things myself, but I was thinking, okay, but women don't have this problem. Women are willing to ask for help. No. I discovered in talking to women caregivers, they're just as reluctant to ask for help as well, because real women can handle it. I've had women say, we're supposed to be nurturers, we're supposed to care for people. And asking for help is a sign of failure. So here we have a problem. We need to seek help, but men don't. It's either a sign of failure or a sign of weakness. So how do we get around it? Well, I'm going to put a different spin on this. There came a time in looking after my wife and caring for my wife that Parkinson's is progressive and the demands of care become stronger and stronger. And I reached the point where I couldn't handle it. I knew I had to get some help. So I finally hired a care aide to come in. And the first couple of days she was in, were one of the most humbling days of my life. Because this woman, Melissa was her name, gave far better care than I ever did. She experimented with different foods that my wife would finding something that she made a killer egg salad sandwich that my wife loved. I didn't know how to make an egg salad sandwich. She spotted various medical conditions that could grow into something serious that she had in mind. She looked after my wife. She called it pampering. I called it woman stuff. Again, I had no idea how to do it or what was involved. She was leading my wife through range of motion exercises. And she was giving way better care than I ever did. Now, that's not to denigrate myself. It's a recognition that, of course, she should give better care. It's her job. She's a professional. I'm an amateur. So seeking help means it's not about you. It's about your caree. And I wish, in a way, that someone had slapped me around the side of the head, metaphorically, and said, "Hey, listen, bozo, get help. Not for you. I mean, that's a side benefit. It's better. Your wife will be better off for it. She'll have better care." Would I have paid attention? I like to think that I would have. So when people say seek help, it's not about it's not about, you will get some benefit from it. And I found that with Melissa around, I was able to spend more time as a husband than a caregiver. And that was valuable to me. But my wife got better care. So to summarize, these are the 5 areas. Learn about the disease, about the services. Find support. Find someone you can talk to candidly who won't judge. Reach agreement with your caree on how to, on thanks and appreciation. Look after yourself. Find the time to look after yourself and get help. I've summarized all of this in a document for the new caregiver. It's on my website, parkinsonslife.com. You can go there and download it. It's free. You can go there and download it and have a look at it. It goes into a bit more detail than we have time for here. But it's, it does expand on the things that I've talked about. So I just want to thank the Parkinson Society for putting this on. And I want to thank you for attending this. I've been there as a caregiver. I know what it's like. I know what you're going through. And it's, to me, caregivers, to me, you are all heroes. And I want to make you the best heroes, or help make you the best heroes you can be. So thank you. And I'll turn this back over to Alana, who will go on to the next step. Thank you.